I had always been a bit paranoid when it came to security. My wife used to tease me about it, but I insisted on installing a high-quality door camera that would capture everything happening outside our house. For the most part, the camera gave us a sense of security and peace of mind. We could easily see who was at the door without having to actually answer it. But one day, the camera captured something that left us feeling uneasy. It was late at night, and my wife and I were both asleep in our bedroom. Suddenly, our door camera began to beep loudly, alerting us to some activity outside. We both jolted awake, startled by the sudden noise. I quickly grabbed my phone and opened the camera app, expecting to see someone trying to break in. But what I saw was something even more unsettling. A figure was moving around in our side yard, trying to access the house through the gate. I immediately called out to my wife, telling her to stay in the bedroom while I investigated. I grabbed a flashlight and carefully made my way to the door, trying not to make any noise. As I stepped outside, I shone my flashlight towards the figure in the yard. It was a man, dressed in all black and wearing a hood over his head. He had a backpack on his shoulders and was fumbling with the gate lock. "Hey! What are you doing?" I shouted, trying to scare him off. The man turned around, startled by my voice. He hesitated for a moment, then began to run towards the fence on the other side of the yard. I chased after him, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I had never felt so alive, so alert. As I got closer to the fence, I reached out to grab the man's backpack, hoping to stop him from escaping. But suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my arm. The man had turned around and slashed me with a knife, leaving a deep cut in my flesh. I stumbled backwards, clutching my arm in pain. The man took advantage of my weakness and climbed over the fence, disappearing into the darkness. I stumbled back into the house, bleeding and shaking with fear. My wife called the police and an ambulance, and they arrived within minutes to tend to my wounds. As I lay in the hospital bed, recovering from the attack, I couldn't help but wonder, who was that man? Why was he trying to break into our house? And how could we protect ourselves from something like this happening again? It was a scary experience, but it also taught me the importance of being vigilant and always keeping an eye out for potential threats. From that day on, I made sure to always keep our security system up to date, and to never let my guard down again. I had just moved into my new house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, excited to start my new life. Everything seemed perfect, the house was beautiful, the neighborhood was friendly, and the location was just right. But things quickly took a turn for the worse when I noticed strange things happening outside my house. It started with small things, like my mailbox being knocked over or my trash can being overturned. I thought it was just kids playing pranks, but as the incidents became more frequent, I started to get worried. One day, I decided to install a security camera to keep an eye on my property. One night, the camera captured something that left me frozen with fear. It showed a man, dressed in dark clothes, trying to access my house through the side yard. He was trying to open the gate that led to my backyard, but it was locked. He looked around, then tried to climb over the fence. But he couldn't make it, and he eventually gave up and left. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Who was this man, and why was he trying to get into my house? I called the police and showed them the footage, but they couldn't find any leads. They told me to keep an eye on the camera and call them if anything else happened. For weeks, I watched the footage every night, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious man again. But he never came back. However, things didn't stop there. Every few days, would notice strange things happening in my yard, things moved, objects disappeared, and sometimes I heard strange noises at night. I knew that the man had something to do with it, even though I never saw him again. I started to feel paranoid and scared, like I was being watched every time I stepped outside. I couldn't sleep at night, always wondering if the man would come back. One day, I decided to talk to my neighbors about what was going on. They listened intently and told me that they had noticed some strange activity around the neighborhood as well. They even gave me the name of a man who had been arrested for burglary in the past, and they suspected that he might be involved. With this information, I went to the police again and gave them the name. It turned out that my neighbors were right, the man was the same one who had tried to break into my house. He had been watching my property for weeks, waiting for the right moment to strike. The police arrested him, and I finally felt safe again. But the experience left a lasting impression on me. I realized that you can never be too careful, even in a seemingly safe neighborhood. And that security cameras can be a lifesaver in situations like these. I had always been a skeptic when it came to the paranormal. Ghosts, spirits, demons, it was all just a load of nonsense to me. That is, until I moved into my new house. It was a charming old Victorian home, with creaky floors and stained glass windows. I loved the character of it, but there was something about the place that just didn't feel right. It wasn't until we installed a door camera that I realized what it was. One night, I was sitting in the living room with my wife, watching TV. I heard a strange noise coming from the front door, like someone was trying to jiggle the doorknob. I muted the TV and listened, but the noise stopped. I figured it was just my imagination, so I went back to watching TV. But then, the noise started up again, louder this time. My wife heard it too, and we both sat there in silence, listening to the sound of the doorknob turning back and forth. Finally, I got up and checked the door camera. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was a figure standing outside the door, its face obscured by the shadows. It was just standing there, staring at the camera. I couldn't make out any details, but I could feel its gaze piercing through the lens. I called out to my wife, and we both huddled together, watching the camera in silence. The figure just stood there, motionless, for what felt like hours. Finally, it turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. We called the police, but they found nothing. No sign of forced entry, no footprints in the snow. It was as if the figure had just vanished into thin air. Over the next few days, we both felt uneasy in the house. We would hear strange noises in the middle of the night, and sometimes we would catch glimpses of something moving out of the corner of our eye. We tried to ignore it, to tell ourselves it was just our imagination, but it was becoming harder and harder to deny. One night, I woke up to the sound of someone whispering in my ear. I bolted upright in bed, but there was no one there. My wife woke up too, and we both sat there in silence, listening to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. "What do we do?" my wife asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, my heart racing. "Maybe we should call a priest, or a medium, or something." My wife shook her head. "I don't want to mess with that stuff," she said. "It could make things worse." "But we can't just ignore it," I said. "We need to do something." We spent the next few days researching paranormal experts, trying to find someone who could help us. Finally, we found a local group of investigators who specialized in haunted houses. We called them up and set up a meeting. When they arrived, they brought all sorts of equipment, EMF detectors, thermometers, even a Ouija board. They spent hours investigating the house, looking for any sign of paranormal activity. But they didn't find anything. "We're sorry," the lead investigator said, as they packed up their gear. "But it looks like you just have a noisy old house." I felt a sense of relief wash over me, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us. We thanked the investigators and watched as they left, then went back inside to try and sleep. That night, I had a dream that the figure from the door camera was standing at the foot of my bed, staring at me with its dark, soulless eyes. I woke up in a cold sweat, gasping for breath. I turned on the bedside lamp and looked around the room, but there was no one there. As I tried to calm myself down, I heard a sound coming from outside the door. It was a soft scratching noise, like someone was trying to claw their way into the room. I got out of bed and walked over to the door, but as soon as I touched the doorknob, the sound stopped. I opened the door slowly, peering out into the dark hallway. There was no one there, but I could feel a cold breeze blowing through the house, as if a window had been left open. I walked down the hallway, checking each room as I went, but everything was still and quiet. Just as I was about to head back to bed, I heard a voice whispering my name. It was coming from the basement. I crept down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The basement was pitch black, but I could feel something moving down there, something that wasn't human. I reached for the light switch, but before I could turn it on, I heard a loud scream. It was my wife. I ran back up the stairs as fast as I could, my heart racing. When I got to the top, I found my wife standing in the hallway, her face twisted in terror. "What's wrong?" I asked her. She pointed to the door camera. I looked at the screen, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There was the figure again, standing outside the door, staring into the camera with its dark, lifeless eyes. We called the police again, but they didn't find anything. They took a report, but they seemed skeptical of our story. We tried to explain that there was something in the house, something that was watching us, but they just shrugged it off. That night, we decided to sleep in the living room. We barricaded the doors and windows, hoping to keep whatever was out there from getting in. We sat there in silence, listening to the sounds of the old house creaking and groaning around us. And then, we heard the scratching again. It was coming from the front door. We both froze, listening as the sound grew louder and more frantic. And then, suddenly, it stopped. We looked at each other, our hearts pounding in our chests. And then, there was a knock at the door. We sat there, frozen in terror, as the knocking continued. It was slow and deliberate, like whoever was on the other side was trying to taunt us. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. There was no reply. The knocking continued. "Please, go away," my wife pleaded. "We don't want any trouble." The knocking stopped, and there was a moment of silence. And then, we heard a voice. It was soft and whispery, like it was coming from right next to us. "Let me in," it said. "I just want to talk." We both screamed and ran to the back of the house, locking ourselves in the bathroom. We huddled together, waiting for the worst to happen. But it never did. The rest of the night passed without incident, and when the sun rose, we cautiously ventured out of the bathroom. We checked the door camera, but there was nothing there. After that night, we moved out of the house. We never did find out what was haunting it, or why it had targeted us. But one thing was for sure, we would never forget the terror that we had experienced there. Months went by, and we tried our best to move on from the experience. We even moved to a new city, hoping to leave our old lives behind. But something about that house still lingered in the back of our minds, like a dark shadow that we couldn't shake off. One day, out of curiosity, we decided to look up the history of the house. What we found sent chills down our spines. The house had a dark past, with multiple reports of unexplained activity and even a few deaths that had occurred there. As we delved deeper into the history of the house, we stumbled upon an old newspaper article from the 1920s. It described a family that had lived in the house, but had disappeared without a trace. Their bodies were never found, and the case had remained a mystery for years. Suddenly, everything began to make sense. The scratching at the door, the whispers in the night, the figure in the camera, it was all starting to add up. We realized that we had been sharing our home with the spirits of the long-dead family, and that they were still haunting the house to this day. Even though we were terrified, we felt a strange sense of closure knowing the truth behind our experience. We knew that we could never go back to that house, but we also knew that we had to share our story with others, to warn them about the dangers of buying a home without doing their research. As we closed the book on that chapter of our lives, we couldn't help but wonder, how many other houses were haunted by the ghosts of the past, waiting to torment their unsuspecting inhabitants.